Anyone come here by canoe? Yeah, about half the audience, I guess, eh? Must be the Canadians. If you lived here 140 years ago when Fort Calgary was built at the confluence of the Bow and the Elbow River, you would definitely have come by canoe. Come to think of it, canoes probably came in pretty handy during the Calgary floods this past June. Canoes and tons of Albertans doing what they do best, pitching in and caring. For thousands of years, water was the natural highway of this land and canoes the principal vehicle. This elegant technology established networks of travel, commerce, and cultural exchange among Aboriginal people for thousands of years. It was also the favorite vehicle of the fur trade and played a key role in the formation of economic and political relations between First Nations and European settlers. Today, the canoe remains an important symbol of Canada. In fact, our most populist historian, Pierre Burton, defined a Canadian as someone who knows how to make love in a canoe without tipping. And sometimes the canoes are even in the water. And sometimes they've had the presence of mind to take the center seat out. Jerry tells me our relationships with canoes is seen a little differently in Scotland. He asked me the other night what the difference was between a Canadian and a canoe. His answer was, a canoe tips. I want to talk to you tonight about the backstory to the Registered Disability Savings Plan that Jerry mentioned in his introduction. Truth is, it would still be a pipe dream if it had been left solely to me. I want to tell you how tough it was to move beyond my rhetoric of collaboration to the hard work and the messiness of working together. We established Planned Lifetime Advocacy Network, the sponsor of the RDSP, to plan for the future well-being of our sons and daughters with disabilities, particularly after mom and dad died. We thought it would affect maybe 75 families. Instead, we entered the rapids of a profound demographic shift occurring worldwide. For the first time in history, people with disabilities are outliving their parents, and no one is prepared. Unlike most of you, we came to social enterprise at Plan by default. Our founding parents were determined to make Plan self-sufficient for two reasons. One, they didn't want the strings that come with government funding, and two, they wanted unrestricted resources so that they could explore solutions. You see, they were desperate. They had pioneered the growth of the disability service system, but they now recognized its limitations. The question, what's going to happen to our sons and daughters when we die, demanded something new, something bold. And to answer that question, we had to rethink disability. We came to the conclusion that the two biggest handicaps faced by our sons and daughters were their poverty and their social isolation, and that if we focused on those challenges, the disability would take care of itself. Within years, Plan became financially stable thanks to partnerships with financial institutions like Van City. Foundations liked us. We were picking up awards and accolades and lots of good media. We had replications across Canada and around the world. Today there are about 40 of them. And we should have been happy. But instead, my wife and co-founder, Vicky Kamak, and I spiraled downward. We realized no matter how many organizations we created, they would never make a dent in the poverty and loneliness of people with disabilities. Our existential crisis caused us to shift strategy. We began thinking and acting like a movement. Vicky will be speaking on Friday about how she's scaling solutions to social isolation using her social business ties, personal networks. So I'll just focus today on a little bit more about the Registered Disability Savings Plan. The RDSP is a poverty-fighting tool. It has matching grants as high as 3-to-1, and it has a $1,000 bond available annually for 20 years. For the price of a daily Tim Hortons double-double and a donut, a baby born with Down syndrome in Calgary today will have around $250,000 in her registered disability savings plan by the time she turns 30. And if she decides not to withdraw it all at once, her RDSP will be worth more than $500,000 over the course of her lifetime. That's not bad for a roughly $30,000 investment. However, if you had seen our original proposal, you would not have recognized the final product. Our original proposal was akin to a huge, rough, and flawed piece of marble. We could see some kind of savings plan in the marble, but no one else could. We had fused it with two other chunky ideas. We wanted to create a pooled investment trust. We wanted to create a no-one alone fund. And we couldn't imagine any of them proceeding without the other, but it was very hard to explain. We spent years paddling our own canoe in the wilderness until we learned to pay attention to the inhabitants of the ecosystem surrounding our idea. And we discovered that it takes three distinct types of entrepreneurs or innovators to achieve broader systemic change: disruptive, bridging, and receptive innovators. Many of you in this room are the disruptive innovators. You challenge the prevailing ways of doing things. You shake the lethargy off the status quo. You wrestle a big idea to the ground. You make it concrete with very limited support. You prove it works. You may even replicate it a few times. But still, despite your success, your model does not easily become the new standard. Its implications are often ignored or they're misunderstood. You may even become a threat to the system. It's not easy to move from the margins to the mainstream and to get your model into the water supply. And that's why you need bridging entrepreneurs. We were going nowhere with our bulky proposal, our three-legged proposal, until a group of advisors gave us blunt advice: choose one and park the other two. Fortunately, we made the right choice because the reaction changed from "I don't understand" to "well, this makes sense, this is common sense, why haven't we done this before?" The momentum shifted and we began having a different kind of conversation. Many of you in the room are bridging innovators. You excel at spotting big ideas. You leverage your connections, your reputation, and your resources. You translate and interpret the value of the disruptive social enterprise to the system, and equally important, the imperatives and subtleties of the system to the disruptors. Foundations are great bridging entrepreneurs. Foundations are brokers, funders, coaches, buffers, champions, and sometimes peacemakers. Our RDSP journey involved lobbying 3 different prime minister's offices. But it wasn't until Prime Minister Harper's government was elected that it took off. One of the reasons that happened was because the chair of a Canadian foundation had been inspired by Plan's story. He knew someone on the executive of the Conservative Party who arranged in turn for us to meet a key party strategist who had an interest in people with disabilities and who had worked on Finance Minister Flaherty's campaign. Within weeks of the election, we were in the Conservative war room in Ottawa explaining our idea. Her response: "This makes sense. Why hasn't it been done before?" Leave it with me. Next thing we knew, and this is literally true, next thing we knew, Finance Minister Flaherty announced the appointment of an expert panel not to investigate whether there should be a savings plan, but to advise them on what it should look like. Bridging innovators are the links between disruptive entrepreneurs and a third group, receptive entrepreneurs. Some people call you institutional entrepreneurs or intrapreneurs, but you are key to implementing big ideas. You have an insider's knowledge of the key levers to advance an issue within a system. You are navigators. You know the formal and the informal channels inside the bureaucracy, who the key players are, where the snags are, and how to portage around internal obstacles. Typically, you remain anonymous, working competently behind the scenes, but you are proof that social entrepreneurs do not have a dress code, or that they only hang out at social innovation hubs. You are as passionate, talented, and committed as any of us. Less than 18 months after the Registered Disability Savings Plan was approved by Parliament, the public servants in 2 federal departments and 13 provincial and territorial bureaucracies turned traditional welfare systems on their head and created procedures for the first registered disability savings plan in the world. At the same time, Canadian financial institutions assembled the systems to make it possible for a Canadian with a disability or their family to establish an RDSP in any bank, or just about any bank and credit union in the country. Those are big systems to turn around, and this was all done in record time. Today, there are more than $1 billion RDSP dollars in the bank accounts of people with disabilities. They can't be clawed back. They don't affect eligibility for other government benefits. The asset limits have been removed, and you don't have to justify where you're spending the money. We estimate the eventual market for the RDSP at about $10 billion, affecting over 700,000 Canadians with disabilities. Clearly, thank you. Clearly, the required expertise and resources to achieve that kind of impact, durability, and scale was beyond plan's capacity, expertise, or role. And you know what? The final product was far better than anything we had proposed or imagined. Our rough block of marble was sculpted into something much more beautiful thanks to bridging and receptive innovators. I think social enterprise is both an end and a means. Mohammed Yunus created Grameen Bank, but he really wanted microcredit to become part of the mainstream banking system. Ashoka has about 3,000 fellows, but it wants everyone to be a change maker. Free the Children builds schools in Africa, but it also goes upstream through Me to We to the source of inequality, pointing out to young people in North America the implications of our throwaway consumer society. A successful social enterprise can achieve that kind of impact on its own. And here's the really tough part: working together. A number of national disability organizations didn't support our proposal for the RDSP initially. In fact, they actively lobbied against it. And then Minister Flaherty appointed one of them to his expert panel and didn't appoint anyone from Plan. That brought out the worst in me. That person was going to scuttle our dream. How could we be excluded? It was our idea, after all. We did everything we could think of to get on that panel, including contacting the former Premier of Ontario, Mike Harris, to intervene on our behalf. I think he tried, but he didn't have any more luck than we did. So breaking up may be hard to do, but I'll tell you, working together is even harder. We have to confront the stadium of our egos. We have to deal with our territoriality, our dreams of glory. We have to let go of our belief that our idea is the best one, the only one. Deep collaboration is not easy. We have to become, I think, as intentional, strategic, and willing to learn about collaboration as we are about social enterprise. All was not well in Fort Calgary in 1875, nor in the other trading posts across Canada. We now know that the technologies associated with the fur trade benefited only a few, but destroyed a way of life for First Nations and Aboriginal people, and set in motion a chain of events that still challenge us as Canadians today. This is not a knock on current policymakers or funders. Our toughest challenges have had decades, even centuries, to become deeply rooted and intertwined. But here's the thing. First Nations and Aboriginal people who have good reason not to trust settler community, to be suspicious, to be bitter, are the very people who are reaching out, who are extending the hand of reconciliation, who are building a spirit canoe, like the one you see behind me. This is Bill Reid's Jade Canoe, which is on the back of the older $20 bills, still in circulation in Canada. Think of who is in this spirit canoe. Of course, there are our friends and allies, but many are not of our choosing. They include people we are suspicious of, opponents, people we don't like, people we assert are part of the problem, who seem oblivious to the challenges, who aren't pulling their weight, who have hurt or betrayed us, who we have hurt and betrayed, intentionally or unintentionally. Yet in order not to capsize in the stormy seas of change and adversity that we find ourselves in, we must learn to paddle in harmony, spelling each other off when we get tired, sharing our resources, surviving despite or because of our differences. I think our capacity for cooperation is embedded in human nature. For example, I'm told it takes a lot of cooperation to make love in a canoe. It's through cooperation that we achieve impact. And that's the greater promise of social enterprise. Throughout the rest of this event, we will be inspired by what is possible. We will learn new techniques and new technologies. And the language of governance and finance will dominate. However, all of our brilliance will be to no avail if we paddle our own canoe. We won't change systems if we paddle our own canoe. We won't spread the benefits of our social enterprise to hundreds of thousands or even millions if we paddle our own canoe. On the other hand, we can go upstream and tackle the causes of poverty, abuse, homelessness, species extinction, greenhouse gas emissions if we paddle together. We can accelerate our impact if we paddle together. We can discover solutions we haven't even thought of if we paddle together. Imagine if we focus on the goodness of our adversaries. Imagine if we stopped blaming the other and took responsibility for our own behavior, our addictive nature, our consumerism, our carbon expenditure, and approached each other with the splendor of our gifts and, yes, our imperfections. Imagine if tonight, October the 2nd, 2013, we, disruptive, bridging, receptive social entrepreneurs, in addition to our other responsibilities, decided to build a spirit canoe to tackle our toughest social and environmental challenges. If we do, I guarantee you, we'll discover what First Nations Aboriginal people have always known. In a social enterprise spirit canoe, there is always room for one more. Thank you.